Cool. So
my hair, is it looking good?
your hair is perfect. Actually, let me frame your hair.
Your hair is awesome.
So welcome to MakerBay. It's a great privilege to have you today. And maybe because some people maybe don't know so much about your work in general, I think we can dive into like a much more specific discussion. Maybe just if you could do like a quick intro of what you do and what brings you to Hong Kong.
Yeah, so I did my PhD in biochemistry from the University of Chicago, where I worked on genetic engineering, a lot of different things. But what I saw in the regular academic world, this is very disheartening. People aren't allowed to research the things that they want to research or do stuff that they want to do, you know? It's like everybody's researching something really boring when all we really want to do is understand how to genetically engineer humans and how to make dragons and all this cool stuff, right? I mean, why aren't science? That's what I always wonder, you know, or like Pokemon or something.
Where's my unicorn?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, why does biology have to be so boring? It's like the coolest science, right? Because like biology, it's like programmable, self-replicating matter, right? So like, when you program on a computer, it's in the digital world, and you can even like, you know, program 3D printers to print stuff. But this stuff is programmable and self-replicating, so it doesn't require really any sort of fuel, or it's like simple sugars or some soil or something like that to make it work. That's just like the coolest thing ever, right? At least I think so. And I don't think people try to use it to do cool stuff. Because like all the money from biology is like pharmaceuticals and all these things. People aren't looking at what people actually want. Like what's the consumer market interested in? And so I decided to leave, you know, the university, and I got a job at NASA, genetically engineering microorganisms to help with space travel. A lot of people don't know, but like astronauts use about 100 kilograms of plastic per person per year. So you can imagine, if you go to Mars with 4 people, it takes like a year to get there, a year to get back. You stay there for a little bit. You have 4 people, that's like, you know, 300 plus kilograms per person. You're talking, you know, over 1,000 kilograms. Like, what do you do with all that weight? You could just throw it out and like start a garbage pile on Mars. Should be interesting. Or you could try to recycle it. So we worked on engineering bacteria to break down plastic into like a carbon-rich, because plastic is just made of carbon molecules, right? Except it's very inert. That's why it's great, right? Like plastic doesn't break down. It takes yeah. So worked on engineering bacteria to generate like different enzymes and different oxygen radicals and different things to try to change the chemical structure of plastic. But NASA was also really terrible because it's the government and there's so much bureaucracy there. It's crazy. It's just really crazy. Like, you had to fill out a form to like fill out a form to fill out a form, you know? I know, you're just like, wait, what? Yeah, before you fill out this form, you need to fill out this one first. It's like, what? Yeah, so I decided to leave to start my own company, and like, I don't think like I'm that smart of a person, and like I was able to learn all these different biology and genetic engineering things. So I was like, well, what happens if I try to teach other people how to do this stuff? Because if they learn, then they could work on all these cool projects and like make unicorns and dragons and all that cool stuff. So yeah, I started the Odin, which is my company, and we sell kits and we run classes and do all these different things. We have like 10 employees now. We're based in San Francisco in the US. And so David Lee, who runs the Shenzhen Open Innovation Lab, or founded it, he invited me out because he said that there's a lot of interest in biotech in China, but there's not a lot of people working on stuff. So I came to Shenzhen and did a bunch of workshops there. Yeah, it was really, people are they're so interested. It's so great because everybody's like, man, I took biology classes and they were so boring, and like I didn't know that I could like genetically engineer stuff and do stuff like that. It was really, really cool. And so yeah, I'm in Hong Kong, just traveling on my way back to the US.
Today.
Yeah.
And so the type of people you talk to in Shenzhen were mostly students or the researcher, or what kind of people do you interact with?
Ex-iGEMers?
I don't know if anybody was iGEM. It was a mix of people, but mostly it was people with non-science background. So yeah, it was people who.
It's a competition between the universities.
I didn't go to any universities or anything.
Yeah. So many universities participate in these programs. I think it's more than 400 universities in each year. But at the first competition, just around 20 or something university. I think 10 years ago.
Yeah. We just ran some workshops in their makerspace. Had a bunch of people come.
What sort of projects and stuff are they interested in? Like, what's the?
I don't know if
Because Shenzhen's known for its hardware hacking and you know
Electronics.
electronics. So was the Shenzhen crowd different from the crowd you normally?
Well, I think people just aren't exposed to this stuff, really,
Yeah.
right? I think this is the first time everybody was being exposed to it, so it was just completely. They didn't even think these things were possible. Working with organisms, manipulating their DNA and all these different things. Yeah, so it was just very, very eye-opening to them. I don't think it was as developed as like people wanting to have projects. Just like it's just the beginnings of people figuring out how this stuff works and understanding it.
A couple of years ago, David did with Symbiota people. They did do one workshop then, but it was probably a lot more formal than what you were doing.
Yeah, I'm not very formal.
I don't know if that
This kind of workshop is really.
Did you go to that workshop?
I have go one conference in Shenzhen before. I think 2 years before.
Yeah.
But the workshop is a little bit expensive.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Like how much?
There's a course. I think it's one by what? I forgot.
Is that Symbiota people in San Francisco?
Something like this.
Yeah.
For the whole years.
This is some American people.
But for the whole years, one is 40,000
USD?
Hong Kong dollars. Okay.
That's like 5,000 USD.
Wow, really?
Yeah. For the class, yeah. So there's David Lee has tried to promote this to the Shenzhen citizens and some the other people in the other part of China, but not so.
For that price, no one can afford it.
Yeah.
So did you guys run classes?
Not easy to afford.
Do you charge for classes here? What's like the average price?
I'd say like maybe it would be 350 Hong Kong dollar per class.
Yeah.
It should be like $40 USD per class.
Yeah, that's very reasonable.
That's typical.
Yeah.
If you do like a series of workshops, I would say the most expensive program that we have run, it would be like a week long. Per participant, it would be maybe 7,000 Hong Kong dollars, so it would be like 800 USD for like a full week. Intensive, including hardware and stuff.
In Hong Kong, even if you just go for a simple drawing class, or which is for a 5-year-old, you would pay 200 Hong Kong dollars. So it's like, what we do here.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you're looking at something and you can come and invent, innovate, use all the machines. So we're just keeping at the same level. The idea is we want to reach out to more people. So
And
it's
teach
not
you
that
different
we,
stuff as
yes,
well,
teach
yeah.
different stuff, but don't not make it premium in terms of price. So
Yeah,
I think that's what we do.
definitely.
Yeah.
So how does the space work? Where do you get your money from? Is it from classes and workshops mostly?
So I'd say 30% of it is from like people renting studios and getting membership.
Uh-huh.
We thought it was going to be 100% at the beginning, but and then I would say half, the other 30% may be coming from classes, like education-related project, and the last half is R&D. So we do projects for companies. We do developing
really cool.
hardware for them, like devices or scientific instruments or collecting data, like a consultant basically.
Oh, that's great.
That's our model. We grew very progressively from like having one space, and now we have also a foundation, and the foundation has co-manages 6 youth center. So we have a mini makerspace in youth center.
Oh, really? Wow.
So we are basically present in 8 locations.
Do you get any government money for that?
No.
No, why not?
So I think it's partially intentional. Is we want it to be as independent as possible.
Yeah.
We have a big grant from a jockey club, which is almost government, let's say, because it's so large.
Yeah.
But we wanted to have it on our terms, if you will. So we apply for grants and then we write the project. So now we have this kind of freedom. We have this project on 3 years, and last year we trained 150 social workers and youth workers and in those youth center. And we're interested to bring more bio stuff actually, because we feel that bio is definitely an emerging part of the maker culture. It's not present enough. It's only a few makerspaces that have this bio. But I think, especially because we're interested in social and environmental impact, we want to see projects which are more environmentally minded and developing materials and developing living things.
Yeah, I wish I would have known. I would have came and run some workshops here on my trip.
Yeah, but that'd be nice.
Yeah.
You come back?
No, definitely come back. Probably later this year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be amazing.
Yeah,
Tell us when you come and we'll try
we should
to
plan something.
Yeah.
absolutely. Because sorry, shaking. Because I feel that the type of people are interested in. I think we're essentially the sister space of Soil in Hong Kong. I think very much. And maybe Seed Studio would be the other, but they are more connected to industry, to manufacturing.
And I like Hong Kong because there was a workshop I ran in Shenzhen where nobody spoke any English. It was so hard.
Yeah.
It was so hard.
So what do you teach in your workshops?
So we just do a basic genetic engineering experiment usually. It depends on the time scale. Usually it's about 2 hours, an hour and a half, 2 hours long.
Yeah.
It also depends.
2 hours?
An hour and a half, 2 hours, yeah.
First.
We did have like a DNA barcoding workshop. Is that what we did? Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's great that you have equipment. So you can do more complex things.
Yeah.
Especially with the PCR machine, gel electrophoresis and stuff like that. Yeah, that's really nice.
Can I ask you what gets you really excited now in your field, like what that you do or that you don't do yet?
I think providing access is the thing that gets me the most excited because, after teaching these classes, I got a bunch of WeChat messages from all these people who were like, oh, I'm so inspired to start working on this stuff. Because I don't think so there's not that many scientists in the world, right? We think there's a lot, but there's estimates in the US that there's around 1 million science research scientists across like all disciplines, right? Not just like biology or biological engineering or anything like that. So you imagine if you could just double that number or like triple that number or something, like what kind of research would happen is really exciting. So right now we're really trying to focus on like education and like how do we best train people to be able to do this stuff, right? Because these people are the ones, all this stuff that we imagine and think about, genetic engineering humans, making all these cool things, these people are going to be the ones who do it, right? It's just like with computer programming. Once personal computers came around, people had access to the knowledge and information and how to do it. All of a sudden you started to see there's estimates that there's about 17 million
Coders?
Yeah, like hobbyist programmers, right? 17 million hobbyist programmers in the world. So you can imagine if there was 17 million like hobbyist scientists, right? And it's possible. And they can contribute so much more, right? Because DNA barcoding is just a start. With
Yeah,
PCR machine, you could do medical diagnostics even. I wouldn't say it's extremely reliable, but like,
So that is makes them close relate to their daily use. It's very important because
Yeah.
don't think Hong Kong is a financial center in the world, but
Yeah.
on average, the scientific background of the citizen is very low.
In general, so Hong Kong, the amount of spending on research development here is about 0.7% of GDP,
Yeah.
which puts it with North African countries, right? And the government, like Asia's world city, right? And so the government, the chief executive made a big show about we're doubling our research budget in 5 years. That's my pledge, right? Which is brilliant. Like we need that, but that's going to take us to Malaysia, Southeast Asia. So our dream is to catch up with Malaysia here, which is really
In 5
depressing.
years.
In 5 years, which is really depressing.
yeah, it's really interesting. So what are like the biotech regulations like here? Did you know? Are there?
So there is a GMO register that because everyone's petrified of GMOs. There's a GMO register that I can't remember the exact amount they spend on this, but there isn't a single registered GMO in it. So they spend like $1 million a year on this register just to keep all of the GMOs out. But if you go to the goldfish market, there are people illegally selling the dark GMP zebrafish and stuff. So it's tightly regulated, but then also not.
The regulation in Hong Kong about the biosafety is very low standard. They have low fixed rules. Okay, when I have attended, I think 2 years before I attend what's a biohazard safety course conference in the CTU, not CTU, the University of Science and Technology. No one knows the regulations, and they said, oh, it's responsible by your operators, responsible by the lab manager.
Yeah.
No regulation at all.
Like I don't have a lab manager.
Because I think 2 or 3 months before I worked in the EY lab, a clinical reagent company. Do you know? There's a clinical reagent company downstairs.
Yeah.
I was there. I am one-man operation. All the operations by me. Okay, just one person. One person. And
Who's the head of safety? Oh yeah. Who's
I to take care of it. Okay. And what is ridiculous is I import some biohazard bacteria from USA to Hong Kong. No need any license. No need any license. I import some what is some sexual bacteria, sexual disease bacteria from USA. Don't need apply any license.
So
but if I want to transport to post some sample to USA, I need to fill all the forms. Oh, so many forms. Otherwise, I cannot import to USA.
Hong Kong's basically, so Hong Kong has a mini constitution that they were given as a legacy in '97.
Yeah, I can't figure
And
out.
but it's barely changed. So the LegCo, the government is so dysfunctional. They've barely changed anything. So basically, our policies, all our legislation here is like 1990s British legislation that hasn't been updated.
So then I talked to my boss. Oh, Hong Kong is really a good place in the world to take some research in biotechnology.
Yeah.
No regulation.
No regulation, but no funding.
Yeah.
So I was at the Christmas summit where that was in Hong Kong when they announced the Jiangqi stuff, and they had talks on different countries showing their legislation on genetic modification, human germline editing, something like that. Hong Kong's policy, all of Hong Kong's regulation is in this 2030 it's in the poisons ordinance. Right. We don't have current legislation on that. We have like 30-odd poison ordinance that is what covers it.
They only take care of this matter only once accident happens.
Yeah.
I found it, Hong Kong GMO regulation. So that's the page, and it's from 2019. But it's
okay.
but it looks like it's from 1960.
I know, it looks so old.
Yeah.
That's really the Hong Kong
Hong Kong, all
government.
Hong Kong government websites.
That's the
are
government
awful.
website. Oh my gosh.
So that's the way it works.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
And so interesting stuff has happened in Hong Kong, but that's like despite the government rather than because of the government. So there's a company in the science park that basically they've basically scaled up fish embryos for testing of pharmaceuticals, estrogenic compounds, and stuff like this. Glow in the dark, and basically because they're still on the yolk, they don't count as living organisms there, and so you can do whatever. You can basically test your cosmetics on these fish embryos, and it's not testing on animals because technically they're not born yet. So all of these, they license this to all of the cosmetics companies. It's
That's
like
nice.
it's a big clever company, but
Yeah.
completely under the radar. They've done this because basically the cosmetic people using not tested on animal cosmetics don't want to know about the glow in the
The
dark.
name of
fish.
it is
That's funny.
What is it? Vitiligen or something like that.
so they test on zebrafish embryo testing.
It's in the science park.
Science park.
And so, and also the circulating DNA technology was
Yeah.
discovered by Dennis Lowe, who's at Chinese University. And so he's like, that's like a huge breakthrough, you know. It's
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
become and that was like
Everybody
a guy in
uses
Hong
it.
Kong, but basically he didn't get any funding or support from that. He got very little funding and support. We're lucky we had this one guy here. But look, so much tech that, so for example, the DJI people, they studied at Hong Kong University of Science and Tech. When they graduated, like, we want to make drones, no money for that, an interest in Hong Kong, so they went to Shenzhen and they're like billionaires or whatever. So basically there's a lot of amazing stuff happening here, but basically there's no
Yeah.
funding for it, so they go elsewhere.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Yeah, David was talking about getting government funding for all the stuff that they work on.
Shenzhen has been
Supportive?
throwing money at this,
Yeah. No, it'd be really interesting. Yeah, that's what I'm really interested because it's
Vitagen, that's it, yeah.
like there doesn't seem to be this culture of biotech yet in China, and I'm trying to understand like how to bring it to China. You know, like what people are interested in, because in the U.S. it's more like a rebellious thing, right? Like
Yeah.
we're like hackers, we're like people who are functioning outside the system, and stuff like that. But like in China, how does that translate, right? Because like it doesn't seem like people are as interested in that stuff as maybe like startups or something.
I mean, the consideration, for example, like cruelty-free is maybe less strong in China, for example. That's a consideration that is removed. But then I think it's more what you're going to do with it. I think that's interesting
Yeah.
for they're more interested in the application, so isn't it?
People are petrified of GM in China. There was a poll. There was a poll of like consumer beliefs about genetic modification, and it was really depressing. But the craziest was 15% of people in China polled believed that genetic modification was an American conspiracy to poison Chinese people.
No, really?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
So
That's funny.
Well, it's not true.
Well, I'm sure people in the U.S. think the
the
opposite.
Chinese are poisoning you. Or something.
Yeah. Oh God.
So I was asking you, what's the most exciting thing for you, and what bothers you the most within the field, and or maybe how it's perceived or how it's been practiced.
No, I think it's just it's the lack of resources. I think is the biggest thing that bothers me. Perception doesn't matter so much. It only matters if you focus on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's always ways to keep doing work around things, and figure out ways forward. But it's so a lot of people who participate in this stuff in the U.S. aren't trained scientists.
Mm-hmm.
They're not people who have significant resources, money or time or things like that. So what ends up happening is it's a very underfunded place where people do scientific research, and but people are working on very interesting and possibly innovative things, and there's no way right now, there's no avenue for them to get money. We tried, so we run a conference every year called Biohack the Planet, and last year we gave out some small grants for research projects, just, you know, like $1,500 US. But still, that's a significant resource for most people trying to do experimentation, right? Because like the government in the U.S. invests so much money academically in these things, but if you're trying to do it on your own, it's really hard. That's, you know, what my company has been trying to do is like, how do we bring down the cost so that it becomes ultra accessible, right? To where you invest like with, you know, a computer, right? We all have computers, and you probably spent maybe $1,000 or something on it. If you can get people to have like a complete lab or all the resources they need for $1,000, right? That would be really amazing. It's not quite at that place yet, but it's getting there. It's getting there for sure.
And so, what part do you think you play into changing that dynamic and like going against that? Do you feel that you're foraying in which direction? Do you feel that you're opening which area?
What part do I play? I don't know. I try to just help support people who are doing interesting things. I try not to be. I'm not like. Things evolve naturally, right? And that's when they evolve best. When people try to step in and control the system or push things a certain way, I feel like it ends up not for the best. So for myself, for my company, the role we just try to play is a very supportive role where we just provide resources and education to people, and then we let them do what they're going to do. Yeah, because once you start trying to pick and choose things or control things or change or force the way things evolve, it never works out well, at least in my opinion.
Do you feel that there are some regulations that would be helpful, or do you think that in general it's better not to have any regulation on biology research? Or
U.S. is very open on biotech research, right? So we're not very like anti-GMO.
Maybe I should phrase it differently. What kind of regulation do you think would be beneficial, and which one do you think are actually harmful?
Oh, geez, that's a tough question. I'm not a politician or a regulator, so I'm probably not the correct person to ask. Because I would just say, well, you know, let's see what happens if we don't have any regulation.
Well, that's an answer. That's helpful.
Right?
Yeah.
Because so there was a period of time in the U.S., you know, before the 1960s, where there really was no medical regulation. And there's lots of countries in the world that have little medical regulation.
They have more innovation.
And, well, they don't necessarily, they're usually countries with lower
Less
GDP.
resources,
Yeah. But you don't see like people just dying all the time from like bad drugs or anything, right? So it's really interesting, and we try to protect people, which is good. You want to protect people, but it also, the average amount of time for FDA, you know, the Food and Drug Administration approval is like 9 years, right? So that means that like a drug that could help people, like from the time it's discovered till the time it's made available to everybody, is 9 years.
At least.
That's just like,
That's just approval too. Yeah.
that's like ridiculous. Like, how do we expect to help people in any reasonable time frame, right? And there's so many people dying. The cost benefit analysis isn't done well, right?
Yeah.
But let's say if there's a virus outbreak and somebody finds, say, a vaccine or some way to deal with it, is there a faster mechanism? Are they?
Well, I mean, it's
Yeah,
the government.
avenues.
they could do whatever they want.
Exactly.
So, like, yeah,
So they have-
vaccine. There's certain things that don't go through the normal like clinical trial process. But you think about it, right? Like, if 1 million people are dying of a disease, right? Let's say like muscular dystrophy or something. How many lives
Have to be lost.
would you be willing to sacrifice to help cure that, right? It's probably greater than one, right? You'd say, if one person dies in this clinical trial or while we're testing this, you know, it's terrible. We don't want anybody to die, but we're saving 1 million lives. So one, you say 10, would it be worth 10? You say, maybe worth 10. Then you say 100, you say, ooh, that's getting a little high. Right? But there is a cost benefit analysis that you can do where you say, like, how risky are we willing to get? And right now the cost benefit analysis is 0 lives we want for 1 million lives. And so what happens is it's so slow, right? Because it's so hard to make sure 0 people are injured or hurt, right? And I think that there's some room to change that a little bit, right?
So what you would say is that potentially if you would enable that cost analysis first to exist, just to be made, and secondly, if the regulation allowed clinical tests to allow for quote unquote accidents or there would be an element of
or let's say
if
you
reach a
release
certain
a drug on the
amount,
market, right?
yeah.
You do some animal testing or something and you release a drug on the market, right? And if, you know, 5 people show bad signs from it, it's immediately pulled and whatever, right? You do some basic testing to show it's not toxic and you release it on the market and see what happens.
There's a protocol for that within research, but not after the medicine is done into the public, right? Like that's basically testing the drug on the public directly. Would that be a correct way to describe it?
Yeah, right? Because then the public immediately gets access to these things. And you have to understand also that, like, the clinical trial is meant to treat the most amount of people. It's not meant for, like, individual outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So if I do a clinical trial and one person gets help and, like, 9 people don't get help, then it doesn't go to the public. Yeah, they say it doesn't work, but it did work.
To one person.
Yeah. But, like, that person, other people will never be able to get access to this drug. So we look at things, like, statistically instead of looking at it for an individual outcome, right? What happens if we're just like, all right, let's try everything to try to help this person?
Is that because of IP and things like that prevent it from just like, well, it's not going to be profitable enough, so but we're not going to give that drug away, so we're just going to sit on this until the patent expires?
I'm sure there's, right? Because you're trying to make money off of it. Like, how much money are you going to make if you sell it to 10 people? So there's actually a drug. This is a true story. There's a drug called Glybera. It was a gene therapy. It was approved in the European Union in 2015 for this disease called lipoprotein lipase deficiency, which is basically like a buildup of fat in your blood, and that can have a lot of negative consequences on the body. They went through clinical trials in the European Union, it was approved, and they tried to sell it for $1 million, and nobody could afford to buy it, right? So what ended up happening is that they just took it off the market, right? Because they're just, in order to keep your European Union approval or your FDA approval, you have to spend all this money on, like, you have to have a facility that's producing a certain amount every year, and the facility has to, you know, be made under this thing called good manufacturing practices. So it costs money, and they were just like, it's not worth it. So there's literally a drug that can cure a disease that is not being made. It actually went through clinical trials and was approved. Yeah, because they just can't make enough money. There's not enough people who are willing to pay the money so that they can make it at a profit.
But that's not a failure of it's not so much of a failure that the safety side is too expensive. That's just a failure of capitalism.
No, totally. No, but it's the regulatory process, right? It's like, we could figure out, like, if you told any reasonable person that, they would say, let's figure out a way in the regulatory process to make it cheaper to make this drug and hold this drug so that we can actually give it to people, right?
Actually, that's true even for the other drugs. Like, if the whole process was such that it doesn't become expensive to actually produce those drugs, if you reach to more people. Today, sometimes people just can't afford to buy drugs, you know.
So I was
just
in
because the process or the facility.
I was in, like, the Dominican Republic recently, which is, you know, like they don't have, that country doesn't have a lot of money and a lot of wealth, and they don't get any like their medical system, because it's socialized medicine. The government can't afford to pay $10,000 for some drugs, so they have like all the basic drugs, antibiotics and things like that, but then nothing else, right? You can't get all these drugs that we get, you know, when we're sick, that cost $10, $20, $50,000, and that's just like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, we're just letting people die because of capitalism? I don't.
So
We need to figure out a better way.
I know someone in China whose wife had terminal cancer, and they figured out she had a like EGFR receptor, something variant, and there was a tyrosine kinase inhibitor drug that's on the market, but new US one, really expensive.
Yeah.
They couldn't afford it, but you could go and buy a Shanghai version of it across the border in China.
Oh, really?
And so they had all of these drugs were available if you know where they are, and they just make things.
So how do they make it? Do they reverse your engineer it? Or how
Yeah,
Oh, it's
I think
super easy. So here's the thing, like this drug
It's
like
not
there.
expensive to make. It's been the money was in the development and in the patent
Yeah,
protection, but not in actually.
So when you like
synthesizing it.
file,
Yeah.
when you file with the FDA and all these other places, you have to like list all like what it is, how you gave it, so they have the exact description of all this stuff, right? So you can just follow step by step exactly what they. Yeah, it's.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so she got another 3 to 6 months extended her life. She passed away, unfortunately, but like she wouldn't have. That drug did make a difference at the time.
Yeah, no,
and there's no way she would have been able to access it in the Hong Kong system.
It's going to be interesting because what we're probably going to see is drug piracy, right?
What's the name of that person?
No, I shouldn't really say.
But is that like a famous case?
No. This is just someone I know personally.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So we didn't find
And so
it.
people are doing, like cancer patients, people in Hong Kong are doing this all the time. People in China are doing this all the
So
time.
how do you call this? They're called drug simile or?
No, I mean there are a lot of
And like
contracts.
India does this a lot.
India does it a lot. You can get. Well, you can
generic.
you can contact companies, pharmaceutical companies in India, and they'll produce whatever you want.
India does this openly. They've managed to kind of get around, but like China does it a bit more like under the.
I have a question for you. So, if I think of genetic engineering and you're talking to common man, for them it's something which only the scientists do, and they have no idea what does it mean and what is it that you can do with it. So, if you want to reach out to more people, how do you explain it in a simple way to say this is what it is and this is what you can do with it?
Yeah.
Because I think just by the thought of it, when you talk to people, it's just that they think this is not something which they could even.
I
think
know
about
they really
doing.
don't.
Yes.
I think what
So
we
I
try
think
to do with my company is we try to show people hands-on,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like playing the guitar or something like that. It's an actual physical hands-on process, right? And once you can walk somebody through the procedure to do it, it's like cooking, you know?
Yes.
Like,
Or maybe
and you're just
even
like
science experiments that we do in school.
exactly, and you're just like, all right, so you do this and you do that and you do this, and at the end, here's what happens. Here's your result, and they're just like, it's that easy. Wow, you basically just mix DNA with some organism and it works. It's really that simple, and that's the thing that I think people don't understand is that like it's not this ultra complex thing. Yeah, so the way that I think is the best is just hands-on, right? Because you can tell people and you can try to convince them and all these other things, but once they see it with their eyes and their hands, then it's just like you can't deny it, right? You're just like, wow, I did that. That
Cool. You've got George Church as a.
Yeah. No, George is a friend of mine. He's a really great guy.
He's a BGI advisor as well.
Yeah.
He's on the advisory board and comes out quite often.
Yeah.
So I was pulling up this antibiotic resistance thing because this is becoming more mainstream, this discussion of antibiotic resistance, and so because it's becoming more mainstream, possibly there's more public support for it and more public understanding of that.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to get to is that do you think there's going to be a triggering event or something so dramatic in terms of speed of change, because you said, yeah, we let 1 million people die slowly.
Yeah.
That's why we don't accelerate those processes of allowing those new drugs to come online. But what do you think would be the conditions for your approach to actually become the norm or desirable, or how do you think it's going
Well, I
to
think it's
transition?
already starting to happen because I think it's just the people, the patients, the people who are suffering don't have a large voice right now, and they don't know how to use that voice collectively. But like, when you see these people, because if you ask anybody, if your loved one was dying, what would you do to save them? And everybody would say, I would do anything to save anything.
Yeah.
And people who don't say that, they're lying, right? It's like, let's be honest, you would do anything. Stop lying. Though some bioethicists will say, well, I wouldn't want to do anything outside of regulation, but they would do anything. And I think it's just making that more apparent, is that when you talk to these people and you say, what regulation would you want if you have a terminal illness, if you're just gonna die, there's no treatment, there's no drug, and everybody says, I would try anything. Like, I would do anything, right? Even if it would kill me in 2 days, I would try, because I'm gonna die anyway. I'm suffering, I'm dying, I would do anything. And I think figuring out a way to amplify those voices of those people, right? Because what are you gonna do? Throw that person in jail? Like, that's hard. Like, nobody would let that happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing we can all agree upon, that like, people deserve dignity, they deserve the ability to try to help themselves. And I work with a number of people who have lung cancer, so there's a big lung cancer community of people who are trying out, because there's not really many treatments for lung cancer. Like, your chances of surviving past 5 years is very little. And so people are trying a lot of new and interesting things, immunotherapies and all these things, where they just contact companies and have the companies manufacture these drugs for them, right? And then take the drugs themselves. And it's really promising. Like, some of the results have been really promising. Extended people's lives, like, way beyond what doctors have said that they would live. And
immunotherapy has the potential of making uncurable cancers curable.
Totally.
It's horrific. Like, it's horrific experience to go through.
And all it is like a little peptide, right?
Yeah.
And peptides are very inexpensive, right? So getting your tumor sequenced and all this other stuff, you can do that, and that can cost money. And doing the analysis on your tumor, the DNA sequence.
But that's getting cheaper exponentially.
Yeah, and that's also there's automated processes for doing that nowadays.
So PGI, cancer diagnostics are like the number 2 product that they sell already, and that's just going to grow.
Oh yeah, no, right? It's and it's interesting because like, these drugs are for individuals, right? And medicine is becoming more personalized. And how do you do a clinical trial on that, right? Right? So when you're targeting your specific cancer because it's different, like, how do you do a clinical trial? You can't, right? So then what do? It's really interesting. Yeah, I think either the countries like US and China are going to have to start decreasing the regulation, or people are just going to start going, to places where there's no regulation. Clinics, people open up clinics, medical tourism.
Yeah.
Because it's like, we have the science to back all this stuff up. It's not, fake science anymore. We have a lot of science. So it's, what would you do if somebody told you, we can try out this therapy and it'll cost you $10,000 or $20,000?
Yeah, I have friends in USA. He lived in San Francisco here. Then he catch a lung cancer, and he had taken some chemotherapy, no response at all. And then at this moment he takes immunotherapy, and also some eats some target drug in order to cure the disease, but I think the chance is not so good. It was difficult to cure the lung cancer, and he consults the medical doctors. No,
It's early days with immunotherapy. When it works, it works, but it's gone. Yeah.
I also listen a very interesting story or news from the other source. I forget the source. Somebody has lung cancer and he tried to eat some drug for healing some pet disease for healing some parasite disease in the pets, and then accidentally they can heal the lung cancer.
Well, here's the thing, right? Most drugs aren't approved not because they don't work, it's because the placebo works just as well as the drug, right? So what happens is they'll see a response from the drug, but they'll see a response to the people who take the placebo also. And it's scientific, it's well known that the placebo effect is real, right? You can give somebody something that's not a real drug and it can actually work.
Yeah.
We don't understand it at all. We have no idea what it is and how it works. But then what does that say about like drugs and medical care, right? Shouldn't people be able to try anything? If a placebo works, couldn't a pet drug maybe work? I don't know. It's hard to draw the line, right? It's really interesting.
And so somebody has got to make the first step, basically. And so, for example, like Scott, you mentioned that you met G,
He Jiankui.
Yi Jinkun.
Yeah.
And so now you're meeting today with you, and you both have this kind of conflictual relationship with authority. I mean, on the public stage. But do you feel that what you're doing maybe today is not regarded as legal or as regulated, but do you think that eventually it will become? And then we'll look back in history and people will be like, those were the innovators? Or do you think that how do you look at the situation?
I try not to view it as like innovation or not innovation. I try to view it more as like, what would I want? What would I want for my child? What would I want for my mother? What would I want for my friend? That's what I view, because there comes a point where it doesn't matter what people think of you or anything like that, right? You're not doing it for that reason. You're not doing it so people hope you're an innovator. You're doing it because there are people who actually need help, right? And like, it doesn't. Here's a question I ask myself all the time. Would you be willing to go to jail to save somebody's life? And that's a tough question, right? If you could help somebody and cure somebody, would you be willing to go to jail for that? And you might think, well, if it was just one person, maybe not. It depends on how long it is. But right, it's like a real question, and you actually have to think about these things, and so that's what the conversation becomes in my head. It's like, all right, like.
It's a bit like the whistleblowers as well.
Yeah.
For me, I think the closest when I'm thinking about the case and the way it's presented, it for me relates a lot to the trans movement in the US. People modifying their own bodies.
Yeah.
Just like, well, they are modifying their own bodies. Like, what would you think would be the difference? And do you think the advancement of their cause, do you think has something in common with what you're doing? And do you think eventually it will be also legal what you're doing?
That's a tough question, because I think it's going to be a long time before this stuff is legal in the U.S. and other places. But like I said, the thing is that like you can just go to another country
And do it.
and do it, and it's totally legal. And that's so strange to think about, that like you can just literally take a plane for a few hours, and you're in a country where you won't go to jail for doing any of these things.
Or go offshore and just be in a boat.
No, seriously, whatever. Yeah.
With the Jiankui incident, he actually broke Chinese regulations, but there was no consequence of that, which is why there was actually no. That was another thing they showed at the summit. Was like, this was the Chinese rule that he broke. Because somebody asked this Chinese ethicist, why did this happen in China? Why did this happen in Shenzhen? And he was just like, it's because there is a law, but it was actually completely toothless. There was no actual penalty for breaking the law. So,
Yeah, no,
The way it's presented is it's really brutal.
it's hard because it's all like a lot of the articles that I read. It's all Western media, right? These are all Western media. And
But is there, maybe if we
it's like always like you look Chinese, China,
it
Chinese,
does say American trained,
Chinese.
American trained scientist,
Right? And if
Stanford graduate.
Like if you look at most when they write an article about scientists or they write an article about me or anybody else, they don't write like American. They don't write like British scientist, right? But for some reason, when it was a scientist from China, they write Chinese scientist to imply that there's something negative about the fact that he was Chinese, right?
maybe in China Daily, maybe we could see maybe a different perspective, because that's like kind of the government outlet for international media, isn't it? So I'm sorry. Do you mind reminding me how to write his name correctly?
H-E.
Okay. No, not China Daily. What's the biggest Chinese newspaper in English?
That's China Daily, isn't it?
China Daily.
Yeah, South China Morning Post.
No, the China.
China Morning Post.
That's
Hong Kong.
one.
Yeah, Hong Kong, China Daily.
He didn't get good coverage in China. They were.
No, why not?
They were kind of
Well, couldn't he be seen as a hero in a way?
Totally, but I think
it was a bit. There was I think just when it was first announced, there was a couple like people kind of tested the ground, and then when they saw like the international condemnation, they just
I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
I think initially they were like, "Well, this is kind of cool,"
Yeah.
and then everybody freaked out, and they were like, "We probably should make a statement."
It was noticed in Brazil, and there's a scientist called Mariana Zatz, that is the leader of the science community in Brazil. She was strongly against that.
Yeah.
And then all the newspapers started to say that it was bad, and mainly because it happened because it was China.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So it's almost apart. George Church was one of the only scientists who was kind of.
Yeah.
Have you talked to George about it?
Yeah, for sure. A bunch. I mean, the thing is, here's the thing. Technology doesn't go backward, right? You can't, stop technology from going forward, right? Technology is always going to go forward, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So what you need to do is you need to put in place things that help promote the safe use of the technology rather than trying to outlaw it or ban it. Because when has outlaw or ban anything worked, right? Like murder is illegal, even if you, in the US, where they have a death sentence in some states for murder, people still do it. So what punishment can you give somebody that's worse than death? Right? There's none. People are going to do it no matter what. People are going to do these things. So how do we make it so that when people do it, it's the most beneficial? Yeah.
So your week in Shenzhen, was there much discussion on it as well?
No, it was surprising. In the mainland, people...
You're in his town, and you're the town that it happened. And
They don't... the news wasn't as big as maybe in the US. Yeah, it was interesting.
But have you interacted with him?
No, I haven't. I've never met him. Not at all. And then, once he became known, it was obvious. He had a really quick rise and fall, right?
He had
Nobody knew who he was. Then everybody knew who he was.
And then they cut it off.
Yeah.
So he had this,
2 days later.
He had this media advisor who was working with him for 6-12 months and made all of the videos and was making documentaries and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And even writing some of his papers and stuff with him.
Really?
This American guy.
No, actually, this one documentary that I've been working on with people, they actually met with him before he announced this.
Is that the Netflix one?
No, that was...
because AP were doing stuff with him is it the AP people?
No, it wasn't 8 people. It was this other people. They just knew somebody that he knew, and they invited them to meet him. It was right before the CRISPR
summit,
gene editing summit or whatever, and Yeah, it was.
It was a complete circus when I was there. There was like 200 journalists in there.
Yeah, he had.
There was like priests walking around
really
in his
quick
robes. It
rise
was like
Orthodox.
Because like, normally a meeting at HKU would be completely dead. Everyone's like,
Yeah.
and also like until 2 days before, they were really worried about that it was going to be embarrassing for all international visitors. That there was like, it was all of the tickets were available. That no one was going to the public talks and stuff like this. Then that happened. The 8 million people watched the live stream.
Oh yeah, I watched it for sure.
Yeah.
It was at like 2 a.m. or
the
something.
HKU transcription people. Like normally they get like 100 people watching the stream, and they're like 8 million.
It broke the HK.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the thing is that like all the scientists are responding like, oh, this is terrible, this is horrible, and all these things, and it's like, what do you think is going to happen, right? What do you think is going to happen with all this technology? It becomes more accessible, right? If you can have a room like that and start doing science, genetic engineering, how long is it going to take before everybody starts doing it?
The first article about him is from 2017, and it was not negative. It was about HIV research.
He was very popular, and the thing is, he's got like 15 spin-off companies or something crazy, and most of them had like kind of failed and were. He was really good at playing the media and getting lots of hype, lots of investment for a company, and then it kind of goes down the toilet, and then he does the next one. So there's a lot of he was in the media a lot.
In the case of China, so is he in a situation where he can't practice his job anymore? Or for example, like now that you have this thing on you, like are you going to have the same kind of freedom? Or when you go back to America tonight, are you going to be questioned? Or do you feel that your life is...
I hope not. I don't think so. No, so I've dealt with the U.S. government a lot.
You getting shit from the FBI?
From everybody. I've met with the FBI before, and the thing is that I'm fortunate enough that I'm, somewhat public. People know me in the public and press and everything like that.
So you can reach out.
Well, so yeah, the government is less likely to harass me because if they do, journalists will just write about it and all these things. So I do have a little bit more freedom than, that was, I think, one of the problems with this. Nobody knew about him, and then all of a sudden everybody knew about him, and there was nothing to judge him on except for this one thing that he did.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. There's nothing to judge him on except for this one thing, and so it's easy to vilify him and make him a villain and make him all these things. But I in the U.S. I also deal with the government a lot, but I think I'm not trying to do anything illegal, right? So in fact, I spend a lot of time reading regulations and all these things to try to find loopholes and stuff where I can do stuff where it's within, the regulation, so I won't get in trouble. But I'm also really trying to explore doing stuff in other countries where it is easier and where there's not as much regulation.
What do you think that could be potentially?
Where or what?
What do you think that could be potentially?
One of the places that I really like is the Dominican Republic. It's really close to the U.S. They have a pretty big tourist industry, so it's even though it's not a really developed country, there is a lot of development there in the big cities. So like you can go there and like have access to modern things instead of going to like some other undeveloped country where there's no access to everything.
Actually, talking about Brazil, they released genetically modified mosquitoes, right, to combat. So they already released, giving quite a large, more than 1 million mosquitoes, I think.
Yeah.
So do you think that there are other countries not only that would allow you to do that, but they would actually support it actively?
Oh yeah, no, I think they would. I think because a lot of countries are looking. Well, in Brazil, they do that because people are dying from mosquitoes, and they're just like, like, well, what we could do is just like sit around and not do anything, or we could try something.
It's
You know?
Zika and chikungunya, the worst diseases, is not even dengue anymore.
Yeah.
Because chikungunya, you take, I know people that had chikungunya, you get up to 1 year
Yeah,
to get
yeah.
fully recovered.
Yes.
Because it
Lot of problems
attacks
in
your
India and
muscles.
Bangladesh
Yes,
now.
my dad had it. And
You
his,
had it?
my dad had
your
it,
dad had it.
and his hand still shakes like it's been years, but he's
Wow.
still not
Yeah.
managed to kind of get it. Yeah, and it's so common, like tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Every third person has a virus, and the moment you lose immunity, and it just takes forever to kind of. And if you get resistant to the drug, then
Yeah.
there's nothing you can do about it. Actually, there's a lot, like especially things like fever and all that, where
Yellow
people
fever.
die and you don't even count those numbers.
Yeah.
And it happens very often,
You
like,
don't even know what the disease
Exactly.
is.
Yeah.
you know, so you don't even find out.
Even in China, they kind of don't. They just
Yes.
get random hemorrhagic fevers in some remote
Suddenly,
part, and
yes.
they never even figure out what it was. It's
Yeah.
like some hamster virus thing that's
And-
like.
And to think of it, a lot of people try alternate medicines, which is like naturopathy and things, and at the end of the day, it's just a combination of some chemicals or some
Yeah.
natural thing, but that doesn't count it as being not legal or following some regulations.
Yeah.
Because, like we talked about Chinese medicines,
Yeah.
you know, it's roots and herbs and things, but you know, the whole thing about clinical trials of those
Yeah.
and how do you apply. So there's a lot that happens, but it doesn't even come in the spotlight.
Yeah. Yeah, no, China's very interesting.
Yeah, and actually in most countries, I mean, like I know in India as well, we have naturopathy, homeopathy, allopathy, which is a lot more natural things, but I'm not sure if they go through such rigorous trials as well.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
US is pretty. So you can't give it with the intent of helping somebody treat a disease, but you can give it to people. So there's this weird. You can like give somebody an herb, you know, for their health, but if you tell them this
It's
will
going to
treat
treat
it,
your disease, yes.
then it becomes
Yeah.
illegal.
So there's virtually no the legislation on Chinese medicine is very low here. But then it's even if you then class it as a health product, it's basically non-existent. So a lot of the stuff they don't. If it's just no, this isn't medicine. It's just a health product. So that's what they're doing with the donkey. They boil up. There's all of that fat for boiled up donkey oil in China and Hong Kong, and they're not classing it as a medicine. They're classing it as a natural product
Yeah.
as a supplement. So then it's not legislated at all.
So I know of this guy I met recently, and he has diabetes, and he said that he was going to go to the US, and there's some organization where, and he's going to stay at this place for about a month, and they're going to give him some. Basically, they're going to regulate his diet and things, and give him some things, and at the end of it, his diabetes would kind of go away, and he's had it for so many years. So they do have things, but it just doesn't get classified as being medicine.
Yeah.
So people just go through procedures and all of that. But
Yeah. You can get put in jail. No, I think that like, imagine if you're a country that is underdeveloped, right? And people start coming and saying, hey, look, you can make a lot of money if you start having pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies come here and, you know, provide people with drugs for free or really inexpensive, and they get to, you know, test them out. Not in a bad way, you know, but in a good way. I'm sure there are countries that would think that's a very positive thing, right? Because they don't have any like exports.
That's
or-
already happening. That is already happening.
and I think
Yeah.
one thing which was very important was the collective voice, because I think there are people who are suffering and there is a need, but it's just so disparate
It is.
that it doesn't really create a movement and the change.
Yeah,
So just like something as simple as diabetes in countries like China or Africa or India, the number of people who have it and the expensive medicine is so expensive, you need it on a daily basis. But if they need to do something, that collective voice is in there.
yeah,
So,
this is so interesting because like insulin is a life-saving drug that you need all the time.
Yes, every single
Yet
day.
it's like controlled by pharmaceutical companies and the government. It doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. Can't the government just like pay for it or subsidize it
Yes.
or like?
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah.
When I think about open hardware, because here we do a lot of open hardware stuff, but it always struck me that medicine should be the first thing to be open hardware.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's at the same time, I understand a little bit why it isn't, but at the same time, I think it's just not fair. So, you see, Open Insulin and this kind of project, maybe they're still very, very, very small, but when do you think that they will become bigger?
No, I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are working on, you know, like I said, when I worked with these lung cancer people, we wrote up documents and stuff on how people can create their own immunotherapies and use them on themselves and things like that. I think it is growing. I think the problem is, in the US especially, it's considered taboo to a lot of people to like test and use a drug on yourself or like work on something away from, even though everybody in the US hates medical doctors. Like there's nobody in the US who likes medical doctors at all. Still, they would prefer a drug from a medical doctor than anything else. So I think it's really overcoming that bias that, you know, we think is the same thing with scientists, right? People think like, oh, a scientist said this, so it must be true. But like, they're human. They're
Humans.
They're no different than you or me. Just because you have a PhD, it doesn't change anything. They lie, they cheat, they steal, they're corrupt, right? They're not immune to these things. But people seem to think that like they're priests of the modern technology age, scientists and medical doctors, when they're just as corrupt as everybody else. Just as corrupt, right? And I think when people realize that, it will probably change a lot. Yeah.
Ben Gertzer. Actually, he's based in
Yes, he's based in Hong Kong and he's from the US. So.
Ben Gertzer?
Yeah.
He's actually, his office is very close to Hechon.
Yeah.
He lives in. Does he work for Hanson Robotics as well?
Yeah.
But he does
He
a lot
lives
of
up in the New
And how would
Territory.
you, like, if you think about
Yeah.
plastic surgery, to some extent it's about changing yourself.
Yeah.
And why would somebody say that
I
changing your DNA is different from having plastic surgery?
I don't know, right?
I mean, like
that's what I think
what,
about all
what
the time.
would define, yes.
If you could like inject yourself with a drug, you know, so I didn't have to work out and I could eat whatever I want, get rid of this fat right here that just won't go away. Right? Like,
I was yesterday if we could have these, especially for women, because we're always struggling with our weight.
everybody
I would love
like how
to
much
change my
time
DNA
how
for
much
that.
time do you spend thinking about food and like what you eat,
Yeah.
right? You're always just like, oh man, I wish I could just eat whatever I want and not have to think about it.
And it generates disease, anorexia,
Exactly.
bulimia, you know?
Yeah,
So we
exactly.
could change your DNA to not get fat anymore.
We just think about it so
Yeah.
much, like you spend a significant amount of time thinking about what you're eating.
Yes, and your behavior and your everything, your relationships, so many things get affected by it. And your
Yeah.
time, you're spending all the time just to keep up with
Exactly.
it.
You're just like, oh my gosh, I gotta
Yeah.
eat healthy, I gotta do this, and
Yeah.
you're just like, oh my God, what if I could just eat anything? What if it didn't matter?
I
Yeah.
would love to be a cobaye for that. Seriously.
Right? But it's like no different than like going in and having cosmetic things happen to you, or like spending time at the
Yes,
gym. Like it's,
exactly.
we invest so much in these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something as just laser hair removal, you're doing that. So how is it different from just changing something? What defines, what's the line between saying
There's
something is
not.
okay or not okay?
it's
or
just
legal or not
politicians have drawn the
Yeah.
line, right? And it's
Yeah.
just
I don't think it's very clearly defined as that. It's just the people have accepted and they say, okay, this is not okay. I mean, like, as I said, laser, just laser. So if you use that, you're changing certain things. Or even corrective eye surgery.
Yeah.
Why is corrective eye surgery?
and it's a lot more invasive than just like
Yes.
maybe injecting yourself with some DNA.
Yeah.
But you know, when I was asking you the question about regulation, how you felt about it, and you tell me, well, if you don't have it, then we try. But let's say you did exactly what you are doing now, but you just changed the discourse around it, and you said, yes, so, some regulation maybe would be okay, and like, because I think it's two different things. Like what you said is that you can always kind of go around the rule, and
Yeah.
that's what people have been doing to do innovation
Yeah.
a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, like, I'm wondering if what bothers the authority is more what you do or more the discourse.
Oh, it's a discourse.
It's a discourse.
For sure. 100%.
Huh.
Yeah. It's not necessarily what I do. It's because they see it as an attack on their way
Authority.
on their authority, on their way of life, on all these different things. And so they see it as like being an enemy of them, when I'm not. I'm trying to figure out how to work with them or do things. But yeah, it's really, so like the FDA has regulatory authority, but they don't always enforce it, right?
Mhm.
So like, they choose when they want to enforce it or not. So like, there's a lot of companies. If you search online, like natural cancer cure, right?
There's a ton of stuff.
Right?
Yeah.
And a ton of companies in the U.S., right? Natural treatment for cancer, right there, is probably in the U.S. or something like that. And all this stuff is totally illegal.
I know the food supplements are also illegal and not regulated.
These are totally illegal. According to the U.S. government and the FDA, all these things are, it's illegal to market something as a cure or treatment for any disease if it hasn't been approved by the FDA. Look, like somebody, if you scroll up, keep going up, like that's an ad, right?
Yeah.
It's like an ad.
Advertising through Google.
Yeah, which is like,
Paid
how is that even legal, right? But it's in Thailand, you know.
Yeah.
It's trying to get non-regulated treatment, you know. Yeah, no, but it's like, so the government chooses who they want to, you know, prosecute. Or
Do you think that this might happen to you, that if you're in the US you have to wear like a lab coat and you have to work in the hospital, but then if you're in Thailand you could wear just a t-shirt and and then you could just do whatever you want? Do you think this is what's going to end up happening, that you're going to be in Dominican Republic and have a hippie life and an American patient will be coming to...
Oh, no, I think that's really what will happen, but I don't think you have to change the way the medicine is done. I think you can still do good medicine. You could still do legitimate research, right?
It's funny because on the preview he's wearing a white shirt that looks like a lab coat if you get it closely. If you click on it, then he's
It's like
actually
black.
he's like
Yeah.
wearing...
Ooh, black is not a good color choice. We're trying to treat people with cancer.
Yeah. Well, you definitely sell a lot of avocados.
Yeah, avocados. Ugh.
So I've seen there's been like the U-biome raids and stuff that was all about the,
that was pretty crazy, wasn't it?
about the illegal billing practices, potentially illegal billing practices and things like this. But there's so much money in the US medical system. Like US pays 5 times more on healthcare than like any other country in the world. And it's so profit driven. There's all of it. Like, do you think that fundamentally the system is the system in the US? There's so much money involved that it's basically will just incentivize.
You're not going to be able to change it. Yeah, you're not going to be able. That's what I
But
think.
basically, no medical innovation can come out. The system,
I don't think. Yeah, I
system
think
is
so.
so corrupt.
Here's
that
the
it's
thing.
Actually killed.
You want to hear something crazy? So.
Yes, please.
So if you take a drug that's like first in class or treats a rare disease and you get it approved through the FDA in the US, what they'll do is they'll give you this voucher. It's called a fast track voucher. And what it means is that because you spent your resources making this drug for a disease that doesn't have any drugs to treat it, we're going to reward you. The problem is that they said, well, what you can do is you can sell these vouchers on the secondary market. You could sell to other companies. So what companies do is they'll make a drug for a disease with they're not trying to provide this drug to anybody or anything. They're just trying to get something through cheaply so they could get the voucher, resell it, and these vouchers go for like $200 million. And they sell these vouchers, and you're just like, the system is so messed up that people are making drugs not to help people, but to get a voucher to sell. It's so weird, right?
But when the whole incentive system is not on curing a disease, but like how can I can create a fake Theranos detector and make this amount of money, but like that's easier than actually like curing a disease or actually having something that works. So the incentive system has basically rigged everything to take these shortcuts to.
Yeah, in the U.S. we get like as before you're like 2 years old, you get like 20 vaccines or something like that, which is, you know, I don't know how many people should actually get, but like we get vaccines for drugs like tetanus, which it's not a communicable disease, right? It's not contagious. I can't give you tetanus. You can't get tetanus, right? It's caused by a bacteria in the soil, right? A bacteria in the soil can be treated with antibiotics. And before the vaccine, about 600 people a year got this. But some company convinced the FDA that they should make this a required vaccine, and now they make $20 billion a year off. $20 billion a year off this vaccine that could treat the disease with antibiotics. Like,
So that you think that there is so much drug in the market that's useless.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
They only just create some economic values for the country, for the company.
For example, the flu.
Yeah.
Now you take a flu shot.
Yeah.
You get it or you don't get it, you just take a flu shot. So you're not even letting your natural immunity
So
work.
many drugs.
The lobby of pharmaceutical industries is very, very high, especially in Brazil. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like you can't change that system. There's so much money. There's hundreds of billions of dollars. Like, how can it doesn't matter how big of a movement you are.
So is that part of the reason you're giving up on the or you're looking at other
Yeah,
places?
no, I think that's I mean that's what everybody I think is going to do. Because there's this, if you want to make hundreds of billions of dollars or something, you know, stay in the U.S. and try to get it through clinical trials. It's ridiculous if you see how much these pharmaceutical company CEOs make, you know, like $50 million a year. Because if they get the drug through clinical trials, it makes billions a year. So they pay these CEOs so much money.
So it's interesting. So this is the new head of the FDA, and he embarked on a listening tour at the end of 6 months. And but do you think he's listening to these new emerging practices, or is there an interest from the government not to control but to actually support, in America at least?
No, here's the thing: is that what I found. So there's this law that came up in the U.S. It's called the right to try.
Yeah, the right to repair.
Yeah. So the right to try law was that if you can get access to a drug legally, even if it hasn't gone through clinical trials, right? It has to be in phase 1 testing, which is still really hard. But you should get access. Of course, the drug companies won't give you access to the drug, so it doesn't matter anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But the government says that the drug companies can give you access.
Mm.
Well, all the people who were talking about it and saying, oh, this is not a good thing, it's not a good thing, it was all these patient advocacy groups. So like the American Cancer Society and all these other places. But then when you actually talk to the patients, right, they were like, we want this. But the American Cancer Society is like, this is not good. Because all the people who give them money, right, are these pharmaceutical companies and all these other places. And it was just like such a terrible thing. Like, people don't ask the patients what they want. And I think that's the problem, right? Is that patients don't ever have a voice in these things.
Mhm.
Because they don't have, like, how do you compete with these billions of dollars?
There's only 2 people who have had access to this law so far.
Yeah, that's because, like, okay, if you're a pharmaceutical company and somebody comes to you and says, I want to try this drug that you're having clinical trial, right? And they say, well, if you get hurt or die,
It's your responsibility.
well, no, if the person
It
gets hurt or
happens.
die, our stock price
Yeah.
drops. So like we have to weigh the cost of it. So the drug companies still get to decide if they want to give you the drug, and most of them say no. Like most of them just won't give people the drug.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because you can imagine, right? If they're trying to develop this drug and get it through clinical trials, and somebody, even if it had nothing to do with the drug, even if you just died from something else, yeah, right?
Yeah.
There'd be a bunch of articles that would go out from journalists and being like, was it the drug
The
that
drug killed.
caused his death? Did the drug cause his death? And their stock price would just go down. So they don't. They just nobody gives it.
You know, like this logic of like Silicon Valley, like move fast, break stuff, like doesn't seem to apply at all.
No.
Yeah.
Theranos.
Yeah. So Theranos would be actually a how do you call this, a cautionary tale of something that grew to be without being properly tested in
Yeah.
that case, or how would you? What is that to learn, for example, from Theranos?
Yeah. Well, I think what they were doing is they weren't pitching themselves as like experimental, right?
Mm-hmm.
People got their blood tested and they thought it was actually, you know, ready. It was like ready for use, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I say to you, hey, there's no treatments for your disease, right? You have muscular dystrophy or something, like there's no treatment for your disease. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you this experimental treatment. It might not work, but there's a chance it could help you out.
Mm-hmm.
Versus saying, we're going to give you this blood test and it's going to tell you your results accurately,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's totally different. And that's what Theranos did, right? They told people that they're going to give people accurate results and they didn't. And that's just lying, right?
Mm.
It's fraud. I think there's a difference. If you're honest with people, right? And you let them know, like, hey, there's risks. There's these things. I think that's different than just saying, like,
It's gonna work.
yeah.
And what do you think of eBiome? Do you think that's still?
They're going to go out of business.
Same.
I used it. So I did this microbiome experiment a long time ago. It was
I did
actually-
American Gut, which was similar but not for profit.
Oh, really? Yeah, but I did this experiment. There's a documentary actually made. It's called Gut Hack. It was on the New York Times, and it's probably on YouTube. It's really good. You should watch it.
Are you next?
Oh, it's about me. But I'm not just saying it's good because I'm in it. This actually is really good. But I contacted Biome. So the experiment was I was trying to transplant the bacteria in my body because I suffered from a lot of gastrointestinal distress. So I was gonna transplant bacteria from somebody else onto myself, in my gut and everything. And I contacted Biome and I asked them if they wanted to sponsor it, and all this stuff. And we had this back and forth, and they, like 6 months later, somebody contacted me and they're like, maybe we're willing to work with you. And I'm like, the experiment's already over. I paid, a national lab in the US, a government agency, to do all the DNA sequencing. But I bought some kits from Biome anyway, just to test out and compare and stuff like that. And they were terrible. Like, they were, like, it didn't look like they did any quality control or anything. The results were not reasonable. Yeah, it was.
Did you do 16S for both?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it should be a like-for-like test, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be 100%, but you can compare like the quality of stuff and like.
There's enough people doing 16S. It's
Yeah.
a pretty standard technique.
Yeah.
So it should be interoperable.
But you can look and you can be like, wow, that is just so wrong and different than all the other stuff I did. Right? I did a couple tests with them, and.
I'm checking your hair was longer.
And also, like some of the samples I sent them, they just after like it took them 1 year to give me the results for.
Wow.
So do you think that this documentary, or did you actually document your dissatisfaction about their services?
No, I don't. I'm not gonna.
No.
They'll probably try to sue me or something. No, I don't really try to talk bad about people online or anywhere.
They came out of like crowdfunding, and Zachary came out to the BGI conference. We got him to come and do a talk about like in the early days about it all, and like, it was a good, it was a good concept. And everything.
No, it is. It was a good concept, but it's just the thing is, it's not that difficult to do, right? It's like it should be a reasonable. And the fact that they committed a bunch of fraud and their data was bad and all this, it's like, what
that
happened?
just capitalism leading them to take shortcuts again? Or?
I don't know.
Incentive systems.
Yeah, I think it was just an incentive system because also they came out with, they found out that the founder was lying about her age so that she could get on all these like
30 under 30.
yeah awards. Yeah.
And she's 45.
Yeah. And you're just like, oh gosh. The incentives in like San Francisco and Silicon Valley are so bad. They incentivize people to do like ridiculous, crazy stuff.
Do you feel tempted by it sometimes, or they put pressure on you?
So my company, we don't have any venture capital funding. We're just run
Congratulations.
by sales alone.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, no, it's
And is that because you don't want to just deal with that shit?
yeah, partially. It's just not like I would rather spend money or spend my time trying to run a company than spend all my time trying to raise money, right?
And does Mr. Church has some that in his network that are willing to support you in that kind of hard times, or not as an investor but as a backer?
So
You guys get money.
he doesn't. Yeah, no, but he doesn't support us financially. It's more of like a mentor, friend, colleague support that he gives us, and he's given us like DNA and other things from his lab. So he'll like if we want to work
Are
with
you
any
in the
stuff.
PGP?
PGP.
Personal Genome Project?
No, I'm not. Yeah, it's really great, but I think we found a way to be sustainable. So it's been pretty good, and we'll see what the future holds. But
Are you part of like a bigger movement that will shelter you from some of these like torments?
maybe people have told me to contact like the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, and other places like that that do these things in relation to like freedom of, like freedom of your own body, freedom to do things that you want with your body and things like that.
So I don't want to hold you too long, but is there what would be a good reason for you to come back to Hong Kong? Or are we going to see you again?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I think I'm really interested in trying to grow. People in China are so interested, maybe even more so than the U.S. Like, people in the U.S. are also they're hard to impress. So like, that's it. Just genetic engineering.
Okay.
But in China, like so far the workshops we've run and everything like that, people have just been really excited.
Did you only get to Shenzhen?
Yeah. only
But
Shenzhen.
Shenzhen's the place, like Shenzhen.
Yeah. So we went to a few schools, so like high schools in Shenzhen, and taught some workshops and taught workshops at the Shenzhen Open Innovation Lab. So we got a nice cross section of.
So that you also organize a lot of workshops in Shenzhen.
Yeah, no, in Hong Kong also. The thing is like, I still haven't quite figured out what Hong Kong is yet.
Hong Kong,
Yeah,
Hong
Hong
Kong
Kong
doesn't
also.
actually know what it is. Hong Kong is confused as well. This is what.
But what is your targets in each area? For example, in Hong Kong, in Shenzhen.
My goal right now is not to make any money because I don't
I know.
think that's the market there yet. I think it's so the first thing you do is you have to create a community, right? You have to create a group of people who are
You mean
interested.
high school students?
Just in general, no, probably
In
not high
general,
school.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, generally this seems to attract people who are professionals between the age of like 25 and 40,
Yeah.
right? That's like the optimal age group of people who are interested in this stuff. And it's just helping develop a community, right? Like we have in the US. And there's like so many maker spaces here in China, but in the US we also have bio maker spaces, right? Which are just labs dedicated to this. And so just getting a community and things like that going, helping people start and do those things, because you can't sell a
Has David
product.
got one? Has David got a bio lab?
No, they don't. No, yeah. No.
Is there any others in
In the program.
in Greater China?
No,
In
not that I
Greater
know
China?
of.
Is this
No.
the only one in? Is this the only one
I
in
think it
Greater
is.
China?
I think it is. Yeah. I think it is. Yeah. No.
You know, when what happened is that Maria, who is a biology researcher, sent like a student. She came to MakerBay and she was trying to make her own fluorescence.
She came through IGEM. She's
Yeah.
And she was just teaching herself electronics and soldering, and then she teaches herself how to do PCB. And in 1 week, she made her own PCB and teaches basic electronics. So I was just like, who is this girl? She's amazing. And she showed me she's doing this for electronics. And I thought, well, that's even more amazing. That she is not from her background, but she feels confident enough that, and willing to fail and try, and she did it. And I was like, we need to hire her. We didn't really have a job, but we created a job around her. And then she told me that she wanted to have a place to do biology stuff, and I started to look into biohacking and new materials. And I was thinking, well, if there's any direction that makerspace could become more environmentally make a contribution to the field, then I'm thinking biology should be the growest area into makerspaces. So that's why since the beginning of MakerBay we gave DIY Bio free space.
Yeah.
So we give it for free. We haven't asked any money. But what we want is to increase the type of content, interesting content.
Yeah. No. What you should do is try to run some workshops, and we can help support. Send you kits, send you things to help you run workshops. Because
wonderful.
Yeah. Because I think the first thing that you need is interest. You need a community. You need a group. Right. Eventually, my company might want to come into China and start selling stuff, but
But that's a good partner.
yeah, but that probably won't be for a few years. First, you need to build a community, and the way you build a community is you just have these workshops, right? You get people interested, and you get more people coming into here. Instead of that room, then it's those 2 rooms or whatever, right?
So,
And it's those 3 rooms.
so that release a lot of efforts to promote the atmosphere in Hong Kong, in mainland China also.
Yeah, both. Yeah, no.
Because now the student is very practical. They only concentrate on examination or
Is that the students
Yeah, no,
or
that
their
is.
parents? Is that the students or their parents pushing them?
It's the parents, obviously, but that's all I hear from the students. When we went to these schools, it's just we're trying to study for these exams, right? That's all it is trying to get good exam scores.
to the university.
Yeah, and it's just wow.
We have so many, like a reverse brain drain that's starting to happen. Like so many Chinese students went to the US to study and come back now.
Yeah.
So you're starting to see a shift, isn't it? I guess in a company like yours, you must see a lot of foreign educated Chinese.
Yeah.
So they call them sea turtles, the returnees to China.
Because of
the founders of BGI were called sea turtles.
And so was Jiang Kui, right?
Yeah. He was
Yeah, no, all these people go to the US, study and then come back. Yeah, no, it's
But what I don't understand is that I look at people like Stellark, and that's back from when was it? He was born in 1946. Do you feel that that it has evolved a lot? Because this was mostly aesthetic.
Yeah.
It was mostly tissue engineering at most. But what he did then was permitted, or was it?
Yeah, no, even right now, I think a lot of stuff is permitted because the governments haven't caught up yet, right? The governments are moving slower than the people who are working on these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people are working so fast on biotech that the governments can't keep up anymore. And
Jiang Kui, was the classmate.
yeah, exactly, right? And it's just happening a lot, and it's only going to get more and more, right? Because the government moves slow and people move fast. And if they're not caught up now, they're not going to get caught up anytime soon.
But when you look at his work, do you think do you think it's connected to what you do? Do you think he was like a...
Sure. Yeah, I think it's all about people having the right to do what they want with their bodies and help themselves and educate themselves and do these things. It's just a more primitive form of it, for sure.
do this older generation of biohacker, or they don't call themselves biohackers, do they?
No, I think the term didn't start coming around until maybe the late 90s, or maybe it hasn't really started been using widely until the past 5 years.
Do you have an idol, or do you have like somebody that you think is truly amazing?
No. I just try to do my own
It must be
thing.
pretty awesome hanging out with George Church. Like he must.
He's a nice guy. He's just a normal guy. he's really smart. He has a very
Big beard? Yes.
no, his access to knowledge is very
He's publishing stuff on like astrophysics and like,
very wide.
Really, really wide.
Like he remembers stuff where I'm just like, wow, George, I can't believe you. I'll just like read a paper or something.
I can't believe that he had like a new department or that has the word inspired in it.
It's the biggest lab in Harvard.
Is that right?
He has the biggest lab in Harvard. Yeah.
But
I just watched the film Genesis 2.0 about the holy mammoth. And
Yeah.
That's the first time I saw him talking.
yeah, he's vegan, which is interesting.
His wife's Chinese.
Yeah.
She's really amazing.
Is she? She's
Yeah.
a biologist?
She's a geneticist as well, but does lots of stuff on education, and she's also been a consultant on Grey's Anatomy. He's like, he's a consultant for lots of TV shows and stuff. Yeah.
Cool, so maybe I'll stop the recording. Thanks so much for
Yeah, no problem.
sharing with us.